Although television was first regarded by many as radio with pictures, public reaction to the arrival of TV was strikingly different from that afforded the advent of radio. Radio in its early days was perceived as a technological wonder rather than a medium of cultural significance. The public quickly adjusted to radio broadcasting and either enjoyed its many programs or turned them off. Television, however, prompted a tendency to criticize and evaluate rather than a simple on-off response. One aspect of early television that can never be recaptured is the combined sense of astonishment and glamour that greeted the medium during its infancy. At the midpoint of the 20th century, the public was properly excited about being able to see and hear actual events that were happening across town or hundreds of miles away. Relatively few people had sets in their homes, but popular fascination with TV was so pronounced that crowds would gather on the sidewalks in front of stores that displayed a working television set or two. The same thing happened in the typical tavern, where a set behind the bar virtually guaranteed a full house. Sports events that might attract a crowd of 30,000 or 40,000 suddenly, with the addition of TV cameras, had audiences numbering in the millions. By the end of television's first decade, it was widely believed to have greater influence on American culture than parents, schools, churches, and government institutions that had been until then the dominant influences on popular conduct. All were superseded by this one cultural juggernaut. The 1950s was a time of remarkable achievement in television, but this was not the case for the entire medium. American viewers old enough to remember TV in the 50s may fondly recall the shows of Sid Caesar, Jackie Gleason, Milton Berle, and Lucille Ball, but such high-quality programs were the exception. Most of television during its formative years could be aptly described, as it was by one Broadway playwright, as amateurs playing at-home movies. The underlying problem was not a shortage of talented writers, producers, and performers. There were plenty, but they were already busily involved on the Broadway stage and in vaudeville, radio, and motion pictures. Consequently, television drew chiefly on a talent pool of individuals who had not achieved success in the more popular media, and on the young and inexperienced who were years from reaching their potential. Nevertheless, the new medium ultimately proved so fascinating a technical novelty that in the early stages of its development, the quality of its content seemed almost not to matter. Fortunately, the lack of talent was short-lived, although it would take at least another decade before areas such as news and sports coverage approached their potential. More than enough excellence in the categories of comedy and drama emerged in the 1950s to deserve the attention of discriminating viewers. They are the most fondly remembered of the golden age genres for both emotional and intellectual reasons. Live TV drama was, in essence, the legitimate theater's contribution to the new medium. Such shows were regarded as prestige events and were afforded respect accordingly. The comedies of the era are remembered for the same reason that comedy itself endures. Human suffering and the ever-elusive pursuit of happiness render laughter a necessary palliative, and people therefore have a particular fondness for those who amuse them. Until the fall of 1948, regularly scheduled programming on the four networks, the American Broadcasting Company, the Columbia Broadcasting System, the National Broadcasting Company, and the Dumont Television Network, which folded in 1955, was scarce. On some evenings, a network might not offer any programs at all, and it was rare for any network to broadcast a full complement of shows during the entire period that became known as prime time. Sales of television sets were low, So, even if programs had been available, their potential audience was limited. To encourage sales, daytime sports broadcasts were scheduled on weekends in an effort to lure heads of households to purchase sets they saw demonstrated in local appliance stores and taverns, the venues where most TV viewing in America took place before 1948. Although a television set cost about $400, a substantial sum at the time, TV was soon catching on like a case of high-toned scarlet fever, according to a March 1948 edition of Newsweek magazine. By autumn of that year, most of the evening schedules on all four networks had been filled, and sets began appearing in more and more living rooms, a phenomenon many credited to comedian Milton Berle. Berle was the star of TV's first hit show, the Texaco Star Theater, a comedy variety show that quickly became the most popular program at that point in television's very short history. When the series debuted, fewer than 2% of American households had a television set. When Berle left the air in 1956, TV was in 70% of the country's homes, and Berle had acquired the nickname Mr. Television. Television was still in its experimental stage in 1948, and radio remained the number one broadcast medium in terms of profits, audience size, and respectability. Most of the big stars of radio, Jack Benny, Bob Hope, and the team of George Burns and Gracie Allen, for example, were at first reluctant to risk their substantial careers on an upstart medium like television. Berle, on the other hand, had not had much success on the radio and had little to lose by trying his luck with TV. The reluctant stars would, of course, soon follow his lead. As more television sets began to be sold, a question arose: what sort of programming could fill the network's airtime? Because television, like motion pictures, was characterized by moving images and synchronized sound, one natural style to emulate was that of Hollywood films. But movies were expensive, time-consuming productions that required multiple sets and locations. Not yet turning a profit with their TV divisions, the broadcast networks could not afford to make little movies for nightly broadcast. Furthermore, until the mid-1950s, Hollywood studios wanted little to do with this threatening new medium. Radio provided another possible programming model. Many early TV shows were in fact based on radio programs, some of which were even simulcast for years on both media. In many cases, however, images that could be implied with sound on radio were impossible to produce cheaply for cameras. Early television broadcasters, therefore, searched for events that could be shot easily and inexpensively. Because videotape did not come into widespread use until the 1960s, very early programmers relied on live transmissions of musical performances, sporting events, sermons, and even educational lectures to fill their limited schedules. After a period of experimentation, the immediacy of live television led programmers to turn to the theater, especially vaudeville. Before the advent of radio and sound movies, vaudeville had been the most popular of the performing arts in the United States. Traveling shows circulated through cities and towns, providing live entertainment consisting of a variety of acts, including musicians, comics, dancers, jugglers, and animals. Many former vaudevillians had become the stars of radio variety shows, and the vaudeville format promised to be even more amenable to television. Vaudeville-inspired variety shows could be shot live with a minimum of inexpensive sets, and there was still a significant pool of vaudeville-trained performers eager to work again. By the 1949-50 season, the three highest-rated television programs were variety shows: the Texaco Star Theater, Ed Sullivan's Toast of the Town, and Arthur Godfrey's Talent Scouts. Within a few years, entertainers such as Jackie Gleason, Dina Shore, Perry Como, Red Skelton, and George Gobel would headline their own popular variety series. Common elements to most such shows were a live audience, a curtain, and a steady stream of guests ranging from recording stars to comedians to classical musicians. The variety format allowed for a wide range of styles. In contrast to the raucous, pie-in-the-face antics of such shows as the Texaco Star Theater, for example, was Your Show of Shows, a comedy variety program produced by Broadway legend Max Liebman. A variety of acts punctuated this 90-minute program, including excerpts from operas and ballets, but it is most remembered for its superbly written and acted comedy sketches. Many of the cast members went on to star in another variety show, Caesar's Hour, which included among its writing staff future film directors Woody Allen and Mel Brooks, as well as playwright Neil Simon. In addition to vaudeville, the traditional stage play was also a natural genre for early television adaptation. Most televised plays took the form of anthology dramas, which were weekly series that presented original and adapted plays under a single umbrella title. Tending to be more cerebral than the comedy variety shows, these programs also had a very prominent place in the network schedules throughout the 1950s. The anthology dramas are remembered fondly by critics who value the live theater over contemporary television offerings. They are also the shows most often referred to in discussions of the golden age of television. Indeed, it was during this period that the primetime network television offered series with lofty-sounding titles, such as the Pulitzer Prize Playhouse. Dramatic adaptations of classic plays in literature were commonplace. Emily Bronte's Wuthering Heights, for example, was staged by network television many times during the period between 1948 and 1960, as were the plays of William Shakespeare, Henrik Ibsen, and George Bernard Shaw. Such acclaimed original dramas were also written and produced for weekly anthology series. Young writers provided several highly regarded teleplays for the network series, many of which are best remembered, however, through their motion picture remakes. For example, Marty, a movie that won Academy Awards for Best Picture, Best Actor, Best Director, and Best Screenplay, was based on a 1953 episode of the Goodyear TV Playhouse. This episode is often cited as perhaps the finest single program of the Golden Age. Other well-regarded anthology series of the time included Kraft Television Theater, Studio One, U.S. Steel Hour, and Playhouse. Although there was a great deal of such fine programming during this period, it should be remembered that it was not the norm. Much of what was on television was of average quality at best, and some of it was bad by nearly any standard. Furthermore, the Golden Age was not all live theatrical variety shows and anthology dramas. The prototypes of successful but less acclaimed genres, most borrowed from radio, began showing up on the air almost from the start. Early filmed westerns such as Hopalong Cassidy and The Lone Ranger, crime shows such as Martin Caine, Private Eye, and Man Against Crime, and game shows such as Stop the Music and You Bet Your Life were all represented in the top 25 highest rated shows of the 1950-51 season. Soon to emerge, however, was what would become the staple genre of American television, the situation comedy or sitcom. The sitcom was a 30-minute format featuring a continuing cast of characters that appeared in the same setting week after week. Audience laughter, either live or by way of an added laugh track, usually featured prominently in these shows, most of which were built around families. The situation comedy had been an enormously popular program type on radio, but it had a comparatively slow start on TV. Some of the most popular early sitcoms included Mama, The Aldrich Family, The Goldbergs, Amos and Andy, and The Life of Riley. It is noteworthy that these last three shows featured, if not always respectfully, Jewish, African American, and lower income characters, respectively. These groups would see little representation in the sitcom again until the 1970s. The variety show itself often showed evolutionary tendencies toward the sitcom. Some of the recurring sketches on Your Show of Shows, such as The Hickenloopers, which featured Caesar and Coca as bickering spouses, were really little domestic sitcoms lodged into a variety show. The Honeymooners, one of the most beloved sitcoms in TV history, began in 1951 as a sketch within Cavalcade of Stars, and it then became a recurring segment of The Jackie Gleason Show. Had one foot planted firmly in both the variety and sitcom genres. Like a variety show, it had a curtain, direct addresses to the audience, and guest stars. Like a sitcom, the principal set was a living room. The plot lines were standard issue situation comedy, and it did not include jugglers, ballerinas, and other variety acts. In October 1951, the debut of the sitcom I Love Lucy, starring the husband-wife team of Lucille Ball and Desi Arnaz, was the beginning of a revolution in American television. The show established new standards for TV programming. It was shot on film rather than broadcast live. It was produced in Hollywood rather than New York, and it followed the style of the episodic series rather than that of the anthology drama or the variety show. The extraordinary popularity of the show guaranteed that these new standards would be imitated by others. I Love Lucy was the most watched series on television for 4 of its 6 seasons on the air, and it never fell below 3rd place in the annual Nielsen ratings. If Milton Berle's The Texaco Star Theater had been TV's first big hit, I Love Lucy was the first bona fide blockbuster. I hope you have found this relaxing. Until next time, goodbye.